we're delighted. The United States is delighted to host this ministerial. The U.S. is a Pacific nation with strong and enduring ties to the region. And APEC provides a valuable forum to promote cooperation and achieve our shared goals of sustainable growth. So we're here today to discuss transportation and energy. And I would say transportation, energy, as well as the environmental issues surrounding it are really, in many cases, at the core of the problems and challenges of this energy and climate situation we find ourselves in. One of the things is mobility is becoming an increasingly important part of our lives. The idea that we can ship goods, including fresh produce and fish, halfway around the world is staggering. The fact that many of you, as I noted before, came to this conference flying in airplanes with the power of over 100,000 horses is staggering. So we have gotten quite used to transportation, both to ship goods. We've gotten used to it in the developed world to move people. But let's talk about what's going on. If you look at the time it takes, for example, in transportation, the key energy source is oil. It takes 5 to 10 years to develop a new reservoir of oil, particularly, let's say, an offshore or Arctic reservoir. But economies can come to life or they can go into a lull in a few years. But because transportation is fueled almost exclusively by oil, as an economy boosts, then the demand for oil goes up. The supply can't really respond. You see a price spike. As economies falter and the demand goes down, once you've invested billions of dollars to produce, you see a price fall. And so this volatility in price, because of just the logistics and the supply and demand time cycles, are going to be part of the future. But this is really tough on economies, and both developed and developing economies. Another thing I want to point out is that I want to amplify the governor's remarks on climate change. Climate change is happening. The evidence for it is growing more compelling year after year among those who actually follow the evidence, the scientists. And it's not only that it's happening and it's changing, but there is stronger, compelling evidence that the majority of it is due to humans. Now, sadly, in some circles, including in the United States, this has become a political debate rather than studying the science. What you do about climate change is properly a political debate. Whether it's happening or not is like saying, well, we can debate the second law of thermodynamics, and if you get enough votes, it can be repealed. Nature doesn't work that way. Let me also say something about the transportation. Transport consumes about 19% of the world energy supply and produces about 23% of the carbon emissions. We have about 1 billion cars on the road today, and there's a book sitting before me, probably in front of many of you. The projection is in a pretty short while, we'll be at 2 billion cars. For example, in 2010, China sold, I believe it was 16.7 million cars in 1 year. These cars and the desire as one grows in prosperity to own a personal transportation vehicle is growing by leaps and bounds, and it quite frankly is a significant part of the engine of many economies, both developed and developing economies. But we've got to do something about how we have personal transportation. We've got to increase the efficiency of these vehicles. We have to realize what the role is that these vehicles will play, and also allow the people who desire vehicles to have them, but not, I've been very blessed, I should say, during my entire life. I've always arranged that I would not have to commute 1 hour going to work, 1 hour coming back from work. The longest I could tolerate was about 5 minutes, except now my job in Washington where someone else drives me, it's a different story. But in any case, it's just the quality of life that dictated that one doesn't want to spend a fair fraction of it in an automobile. So there are incredible challenges to the transportation. there are incredible challenges in that if you look around nations, not only APEC nations, but nations around the world, the access to oil, the fear that your access might be cut off, the access to gas, these are things that are weigh heavily on any government official. But the bottom line is, unless we diversify our transportation energy, we will be still chained to these volatile prices and volatile prices of a source that is ultimately finite, and a source that is very difficult to capture the emissions from a tailpipe to prevent or mitigate the worst of climate change. So there are technological options and solutions. Let me just briefly mention a few. There's electrification. With electrification, if you have clean sources of energy, you need not capture the tailpipe emissions. So what does that mean? It means batteries. Now let me tell you about today's batteries. If you look at the Chevy Volt, it can go about 40 miles, which turns out to be, in U.S. usage, up to 90% of the average use of a car per day. It goes to 40 miles on a single charge, and then it has to be recharged, or it flips into a gasoline mode. There's cars like the Nissan Leaf, which can go about 75 to 100 miles on a single charge. Now, the cost of a Chevy Volt battery is not really known, but it's estimated to be on the order of $10,000, and more for a Nissan Leaf. The cost of that battery will come down, probably by a factor 2 within the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, just by economies of scale. But what needs to be done is that battery, if the cost comes down by a factor 3, if the energy capacity of the battery increases by a factor of 3, then you can go 300 miles on a single charge, and at today's electricity and gasoline prices in the United States, at about 1/5 the cost. And if it comes down by a factor of 3, you can dispense with the internal combustion engine, and you will have a car that would be competitive, a $20,000 car with a competitive range, but an operating expense that's far less. And so there's a tremendous amount of excitement there, but to be candid also, there will have to be some technological inroads, whether you call them breakthroughs or not. We don't see our way to getting a factor of 3 and 1/3 the cost. We do see a factor of 2 in cost and other things. And so this is going to be a very exciting area of development. The good news is there's a tremendous number of scientists and engineers who are now in this because they see the incredible opportunity for this type of battery. I could go through other things like biofuels. Sugarcane in Brazil does make sense. It does make environmental sense, and it's competitive with gasoline today. For those countries who can go sugarcane, because sugar is a perennial crop, it fixes its own nitrogen, the energy inputs are far less, and so there's a great reduction in carbon, the total life cycle of carbon emission for sugar. But sugarcane doesn't grow everywhere, and the Department of Energy is very focused on developing methods of growing biofuels from woody materials, lumber residues, agricultural residues, perhaps even algae perhaps even grown in salt or brackish water that can replace fuel. Right now, we don't have a advanced biofuel drop-in substitute for diesel, jet fuel, and gasoline that is competitive without subsidy in today's market of, let's say, $80 to $100 a barrel oil. But we are, again, very encouraged that there is a real possibility. I cannot say whether it's going to be 5 or 10 years or something like that. But again, one of the most rapidly developing areas in science say that these things really are possible. And it happens to be a particular hobby of mine of following the synthetic biology developments in advanced biofuels. And then finally, there are other technologies like fuel cells, rapid development in fuel cells. We still need a clean source of hydrogen. But these are examples of things where technology can really give us much better choices to the internal combustion engine and to oil. This is very important, and as a scientist, I'm very optimistic that science will rise to the occasion and deliver these things. But I should caution you, let's not say okay, it's under control. We don't really have to do anything. We'll just look at the short term, figure out how to get access to oil, and not worry about it, because it's, I think, foolish if any country plans a national strategy waiting for the scientific miracle to happen. And so for that reason, I think meetings like this, where you actually look at what is possible in the technological roadmap, but also what needs to be done on the policy side to nudge industries, to nudge R&D, to nudge behaviors, to nudge everything in the right direction so that we can satisfy our energy security, our economic prosperity, and our environmental responsibility. So with that, I will conclude my remarks and we'll open the next session. So